Last night, I was watching that 70s show reruns, eyes heavy and mind in a daze. I was starting to fall asleep when I awoke to what I thought was a loud thump by the patio door. The chocolate chip cookie I was halfway through slid off my hand, somersaulting down my torso, as this noise brought me to an awakening twitch. Just an animal, I thought, or the house settling. Eric Foreman is so goofy. Donna is always out of his league. Eric is lucky. I like this show. Back to sleep. Thump. This time from the ceiling. I shrieked. What the hell is that? This time I sit up, with upright posture like I'm ready to focus on any miniature detail that strikes my senses. I turn the kitchen light on, just out of a general state of fear, without really any concern about anything being in the kitchen. I check the back deck for the thump from before. That's super weird, I think. Nothing else happens. I start to relax. I'm not really worried at this point, but still a little on edge. I'm a college student spending the summer at home with my parents, working in downtown DC. They're at the beach. I'm alone in this rather large house. It's 10:36 p.m. The door knocks. Seriously? I think. Now again, if I were on the set of a horror movie, or had been watching something scary for that matter, I would have drawn an immediate connection between the thumping noise and the door knocking unusually late at night. But neither of these things applied to me at that moment. So I didn't. I was still kind of anxious though from those thumps. But when the door knocked, my attention immediately forgot about this noise and was likely nothing to worry about. Probably a salesperson or a mailman. I remember one time a few years back, a UPS man rang our doorbell at about midnight to drop something off. I was the only one awake, so this scared the crap out of me. Maybe it was something like that. The most likely scenario would be my buddy Frank, who considered coming over but said he was too tired. He can be a little spacey though sometimes, so I guess he could have changed his mind without telling me. I guess I'll go over there and at least tell whoever the hell it is that I'd like my privacy. Unless it's Frank, of course, who I will then remind how spacey he can be. A little weirded out by the situation though, I grab the first thing that resembles a weapon. An old lacrosse stick. I hold it from the head with the shaft facing outwards like a lightsaber. As I turn the corner to the foyer, I see through the door a pair of skinny legs with odd worn slippers. Alright, this is a little weird. That's definitely a skinny chick. Maybe she's confused trying to visit a friend and knocked on the wrong house. The house next door is about the same size. Doesn't really look a lot like mine, but I don't know what else it could possibly be. All of this enters my mind in the matter of seconds between my footsteps in the kitchen and the doormat between the front door and the rest of my home. As I stand between the large modern door and whoever the hell is out there, I lean my lacrosse stick on the ground behind me, so this stranger won't see it. As my hand floats hesitantly towards the doorknob, I hear a voice coming from the other side of the door. No clear words, just light whispers. I assume someone must be with the slippers girl, because I haven't even opened the door yet, and as far as I can tell, this person hasn't even seen that someone is home, unless she's talking to herself. That thought didn't calm my mind at all though. My hands stopped frozen in midair, about halfway between the rest of my body and the door, like I was about to do some weird robot dance move. I wait for several seconds, disturbed by the odd synchronization between my movement towards the doorknob and the voice outside. I wait longer. No voices. I take a deep breath. It's through my nose and out through my mouth. Knock, knock. I open the door about 3/4 way. Quickly, like a toddler anxious and curious to discover the monster in their closet. I stick the right half of my body out, facing two dark feminine figures on my porch. The first thing I notice is those beat-up slippers. I look up from there, my head and neck tilting upwards to see the rest of her. Straight black hair, uncombed, matted in different directions. She looked sickly, shaking in the cold, with a hooded sweatshirt and tiny khaki shorts. She's about 5'3", looks to be about 13, staring straight forward, which for me, at 5'9", standing on a raised surface above my lowered porch, is at my pelvis. In the dark, I cannot make out the features of her face, but could tell that something about her was awkward, the way she stood there off balance. Her neck tilted to the left side like a chewed-up, overused doll. Before I can react in any way, I observe her partner, about a half a foot behind her, and to the left, a noticeably younger girl, maybe 9 years old, but with about an inch over her sister, wearing a ragged, dark blue shirt, black pants, rain boots. She had similar black hair, though didn't have the same bizarre demeanor as her older sister. I look down at these two girls, and have no idea how long it had been since I had opened the door. Have they said anything? What do I say? This is too weird. Can I help you? I muster out, in the tone I typically use to talk to kids, but with an undertone of chill to my voice. I stutter some when I'm nervous or excited, and here I could barely make out a word. Hello, sir. Please, we are cold and would like to use the phone. The younger one says that, her head facing straight forwards. Her tone, it was like nothing I'd ever heard before. It was feminine, sure, but each word left her mouth fully independent of the other one, like they were just words being spit out of a machine and placed in the correct order by a third party. Almost like a robot. But she was clearly human, a young girl I'm speaking to, yet somehow very, very off. She didn't sound her age. She sounded at least 14 or 15, but she looked no older than 10. Why did she speak to me and not the older sister? What's going on? Is her older sister shy? Mentally handicapped? Am I dreaming? And what does this mean about using my phone? It was like she was speaking off a script and mixed up her question. Did she mean to ask something else? Not sure how to respond to this arbitrary question, I manage. Well, I'm not sure what you're asking. Are you two lost? First, nothing. Just stares, straight forward, directly ahead, as if with no visual awareness. Then, the younger one. Please, sir, we are alone and need to call home. Let us in. Her response, with the same monotone voice, didn't really answer my question. It was like she was speaking without any concern over it. Just when it was time for her next line, and the last part, let us in, like a command, completely separate from her prior polite, candid request. Trembling in fear, confused, with a strong sensation telling me something was horribly wrong, I said, Well, I'm sorry, but I cannot let you in my house. You'll have to stay here while I grab a phone and call for you. I couldn't leave these two kids stranded out here, but I knew. Something in the pit of my stomach just told me I could not let them in. I was scared out of my mind. The two just looked straight forward, not responding. And suddenly, the older one, who has yet to move or say anything, changes her expression completely. She squeezes her fists as they shake at her sides as if in great pain, and without moving her pale face or neck, makes a smile, showing her teeth all at once. They were sharp, inhuman, like an animal's. At this, I make an obvious, loud scream of terror. The younger one notices my fear and looks up at me, and her pale face, her eyes, blackness. Pure black. No clear iris or retina. Like two black marbles. I then noticed her silent, smiling older sister's black eyes as well. A grotesque nausea floods my stomach, closing in on me, choking me. I am frozen. I do not manage a scream. I can't. I am lost in fear. My entire body speeds up, tingling, numbing. I lose myself. And finally, after what feels like several minutes, I let out a noise of horror that I don't think I've ever made. As I close the door in front of me and retreat to the safety of my home. My body is still shaking. I stand, crying, trembling in the front of the door. I need to reach my cell phone, which is in the family room. I can still hear that 70s show in the background, which brings some relief, but it sounds off now, foreign, almost like another language in my fearful state. I need to call the cops. I can't let them in. "Get out of here!" I yell while banging on the door in an attempt to scare them off. Undiscernible sounds come from the other side, like animal cries or barks. It doesn't sound like the younger girl. I know it isn't. It's the older girl, the silent, mentally off one. But I can't fathom this. No. I need to reach my cell phone, but I can't move. I can't lose track of them. I can see the slippers in the side window. I know she's still there. More animal noises from outside. I scream, yell, bang my lacrosse stick against the door. Anything I can get out of my tired lungs and muscles. I felt like I was being attacked by a grizzly bear. I was in full-on survival mode, doing all I could to scare them away. But any noise I made was matched by the older girl, with her disturbing barks and screams that to this day haunt my dreams. Then, from the other side of the door I hear a muffled, "We just want to call our mother," from the younger girl. "Please, we are scared and alone. Let us in. Let us in." That last part, "let us in," in the exact same cadence twice over, like a recording. "Please, let us in," like a chant. "Let us in. Let us in. Let us in." The younger girl continues, each command louder and more assertive than the last one, as the older girl's noises matches her demands. I wait for any sign of safety of this horrible nightmare coming to an end. I continue screaming at them until finally it stops. The noises, the chanting, gone. The slippers are gone. I look out my window, sprinting legs, the older girl running the speed of a male track star, but her legs twisting over each other like a circus freak. This is so screwed up. I see her trail off, catching up with the younger sister, who must have given the orders to leave while she strayed for a minute or two barking and screeching and yelping like a Neanderthal. I watch as the older sister finds her younger sister waiting on the other side of the road. They stand there, not looking back at my house, staring straight ahead the other way, like they are waiting for something, someone. And suddenly, a large, wiry figure walks towards them. Long legs and arms and lanky, inhuman features, with the shape of a woman, but far too tall and awkward in form, like one of those scarecrow-like animations from a Tim Burton film. This creature, this monster, leads them away into the night. I did not leave my front door the entire night. I didn't sleep, and barely have since. Close family, my girlfriend, and my friends want to believe me. They say they don't think I'm crazy, but I feel like they don't really believe me. This is actually so screwed up, whatever it is, whoever they are. It's real. They're like these subhumans trying to take us, or have them join them. I don't know what it is. They create this energy of fear and terror, like nothing I have ever experienced. I lay awake at night, terrified of when I open my eyes, that older sister will be outside my window, hanging from a tree, smiling at me, barking, waiting for me to walk outside, leave the house. I haven't left since. Update. It's been a few days now and I've managed to leave the house at the request of my loved ones. Each hour that passes, I do feel a little more safe. I know this sounds like something out of a horror movie, but it's so messed up, and the realest thing I've ever experienced. This is not satire. I'm not looking for your fake online attention or internet points, nor would I waste my time. I believe that there is something supernatural happening to me. Either that, or I'm developing schizophrenia. Let me go back to the start. About 10 years ago, I was in a very dark place. I was becoming a sociopath. Yada yada, crappy childhood. Anyway, I never believed in God, or at the least, the stereotypical man in the sky with a beard. Obviously, whatever God is, it's far more powerful and far smarter than some petty angry God who actually cares about the clothes that people wear and who they sleep with. But there was a divine power that has always been indisputable. Anyway, I hated everyone, myself most of all. I don't remember it exactly, but at some point I found myself praying to the divine that I would do anything to not be me, and not in a good way. As I said, I was in a very dark place. The divine I was praying to was not loving. I wanted power more than anything, and as insane as this sounds, I felt energy go through me, like goosebumps, but on the inside. Not adrenaline either. It's completely different. Ever since then, I've been able to temporarily make this feeling flow through my body. But I have to go to a dark place or to meditate. That's not the interesting part. This started about 4 years ago. I had matured quite a bit since then, and I was not nearly as dark and unhappy as I used to be, and very occasionally used mushrooms, LSD, and DMT, all in less than 10 times for everything. I was living with my grandparents at the time, and they are your stereotypical Christian old-school grandparents. I was smoking a bowl at my house while my grandparents were at work. They never came home before 5. It was somewhere around noon, when I was smoking, that I heard a loud bang coming from my shed. I understood immediately that I needed to stop and go inside. So, I did. Not 1 minute later, my grandmother pulled in, because she had forgotten her phone. Ever since then, occurrences just like this happened to me. One time I needed a Ziploc bag, and when I opened my door to my room, there was a Ziploc bag right on the ground in front of it. Now, whenever I'm about to make a bad decision, I can hear certain noises. Not noises in my head, but if there's a sharp cracking noise to my right side, such as a water bottle crinking, or a pen rolling to hit the floor, just any high-pitched noise, I know the decision that I'm about to make is not a good one. If I hear a train before I make a decision, it's always, every single time, has led to a positive outcome. Sometimes I'll wish for something to happen when I'm stressed out. For instance, I was doing landscaping for my uncle. and I was basically just shoveling gravel into a wheelbarrow and moving it for 8 hours for 3 days. Yes, I was being a little brat about it. I just begged for anything to happen to me so that I could get out of it. 30 minutes later, my father arrived and told me my other uncle had overdosed on heroin, and that we were leaving to go see everyone. I've even started seeing figures out of the corner of my eye. Sometimes I'll see a tracer or experience microplasia. I've experienced a green flash. I get random visions of an eyeball when I close my eyes sometimes. I once woke up at about 3 a.m. and was seeing visions of my cat. I could feel it outside the room, wanting in. My cat was sitting right there waiting for me when I opened the door. These occurrences happen frequently now. Maybe because I've learnt to see the signs, or maybe because I'm slowly losing my mind. All of this could be coincidence. All of it could be in my head. But I don't think so. I feel like it's a demon, but not in a bad way. I'm not afraid of it. I've tried to talk to it, but I always lose focus when I try. I do hear something speak to me when I focus and try, but never more than a few seconds. Even when I meditate and clear my mind, it's the same story. Did I summon a demon when I was younger? I offered my soul for power. That seems like a pretty bad idea to me looking back now. Any advice, any experts, anything like that would be much appreciated. I was almost killed 6 years ago by a friend, and it dabbles into the paranormal at times. This took years for me to be able to talk about. I'm still dealing with PTSD associated with the event. 6 years ago, myself and a male friend called Sam decided we wanted to go camping. I'd known him for years, and he was one of my best friends, so I wasn't weirded out by going camping alone with him. But I decided to invite a girlfriend along. The more the merrier. Rita. So we decided to go camping at this spot. I hadn't been to that particular one in a couple of years, but I still remembered the basic general directions to get there. We stopped at a gas station outside their last tiny town and asked to make sure we were going the right way, to which the attendant pointed and said, "Follow the storm." And sure enough, huge black clouds are formed in the direction of our campsite. I mean, this was, to date, the most terrifying storm that I had ever seen. What's a story without a crazy storm, right? So we sit in the car and discuss going home, but being the badasses that we are, we decide to tough it out. We all like camping in the rain during storms. Now, we start driving on this dirt road in the middle of nowhere, and as we're getting closer to the campsite, I start getting this horrible feeling. Just horrible. There's no way to explain it, other than I knew something bad was going to happen. We eventually decide to turn around, because the storm was that bad. The lightning was hitting right outside our car, and it seemed way too dangerous. So we start heading back towards town, and the second we leave the forest, boom! No storm. Okay. Well, if the storm is localized in this area, we'll go camp elsewhere. About 20 minutes from our town, there is a reservoir with a man-made lake and a few camping spots in various spots. So we park there, pick up our stuff, and start on the trail that runs around the lake, so that we can find a spot with more privacy. The spot where we parked our car was right at the opening of the trail, and a couple of cars were camped at the spot right there. We stopped and chatted casually with them. They seemed pretty cool, so we invited them to head out our way in about an hour, after we'd set up shop and we'd all play games and drink together. We'd get to our spot and set up camp, and I randomly get a text message on my phone from another friend. This was weird because cell service is super shoddy out in this area. She is an artist friend of mine, whose stars have risen greatly in the last few years. I explain where we are, and she says, "Great. I've been looking for a really big fire recently. I'm on my way." Kind of an odd statement, but artists are strange people, and she smokes a lot of weed, so I don't really understand half of what she says. So, let's fast forward time here for the sake of the story. We are having a great time. The other couples come over, and we're drinking and having a blast, and my artist friend shows up with this monstrosity of a statue. She said that she made it in her college freshman art class, and it brought her horribly bad luck for 4 years, and she wants to burn it. I wish to God I had some sort of bad feeling about it, but I'm not really one to believe in supernatural or weird things, so we all laugh and throw it in the fire. Fast forward a couple of hours. My artist friend brought her weed out and smoked with my friend Sam for a few hours. Now Sam is mixing liquor and weed. Rita and I don't smoke, and it starts getting dark. And the new couple heads towards their camp, and my artist friend decides to head home, as she was not planning to spend the night. So, it was just the original trio left. At about this time, Sam is starting to act very weird. We laughed it off as Cross faded, which nearly cost me my life. It started off with his voice changing. It went from normal to very low, dark, and gravelly. He sounded like a totally different person. Once again, we just think that he's a bit screwed up. Then it gets worse. He starts babbling nonsense. It started off pretty quietly, but got more and more understandable. He pulled Rita aside and told her he worked for the CIA, had millions of dollars in offshore accounts, and could make any of us disappear in an instant and get away with it with no issue. Please keep in mind, this is one of my absolute best friends, and I've never felt the least bit scared around him. We just laugh off the veiled threats. Haha, okay, drunk ass. Around this time, Rita notices that her hatching that we were using for firewood had gone missing. We searched everywhere, but it was just too dark. We give it up as a lost cause until sunup. Sam is still muttering dark nonsense to himself, sitting on the opposite side of the fire pit alone. Eventually he passed out, and Rita and I stayed up chuckling about how weird he'd acted, and congratulated ourselves on a pretty fun night. About an hour later, we start to feel raindrops, and the damn storm we'd driven to avoid is getting ready to dump on our heads. Oh well, it's late. We'll get drunky in the tent and go to bed. This is where it gets real. We shake him gently until he moans, and we explain that it's starting to rain and that it's time to get to bed. He struggles up, and Rita and I each grab a side and haul him in the tent. We stop in front of the tent to unzip it, and he goes nuts. Totally out of this world, possessed by the devil himself. I'm not even being dramatic about this. He starts screaming this horrible high-pitched sound. One I'll never be able to get out of my nightmares. I was bent over, so I missed the swing that Rita gets thrown to the other side of the camp. He turns around, gracefully I might add, driven stupor gradually gone, and kicks out the last coals from the fire. This is happening in a matter of seconds, but time was slowed down for me. I remember every tiny detail. So the fire is out, the campsite is 100% pitch black, no moon because of the storm clouds. Next thing I know, Sam is standing next to me. So close, I can feel him breathing, and then all of a sudden I'm on the ground. I hit hard enough for the air to be knocked out of me. Not that I'd be able to breathe anyway, because Sam was sitting on my stomach, with his hands wrapped very tightly around my throat. He was strangling me with all of his very significant strength. Now Sam is one of those super tall muscular types that have crazy long monkey arms. I'm reaching up to try and push him off me, as his arms were so long that I couldn't even touch his chest. I was scraping at his arms and bucking underneath him, trying to get him off me. I can hear Rita screaming my name, trying to find out where I am, but at this point I'm blacking out. It seemed like an eternity, but in reality it was probably no more than a few minutes. Through my fading vision I see Rita, punching and fighting Sam, trying her hardest to get him to let go. She's a rugby player, so she's pretty scrappy. I black out for a few minutes. I only have Rita's version of the story. But after I go limp, she understandably freaks out and assumes that he's killed me. She goes into overdrive and starts kneeing him in the face. Eventually she hits him enough times to stun him enough to make him let go, and she pushes him aside and hauls me up, still unconscious, and seriously thought I was dead. And dead weight is no easy thing. Go Rita. I guess I was out for a couple of minutes, but when I come to, she's dragging me down the path, crying quietly. I come to pretty much full force, and am immediately on freak-out mode. Hysterics, naturally. Screaming, crying, shaking uncontrollably, and Rita is telling me to hush. That Sam hadn't followed us, but we certainly didn't want him to start. I managed to control myself a little, and I managed to start carrying my own weight to walk. Now, to add insult to injury, my flip-flops had fallen off during the attack, and I was now walking barefoot on a horribly rocky path. This was not pleasant, and I could feel the cuts. So Rita, being the badass she is, takes off her sandals and puts them on my feet. Seriously, this girl, Jesus. So, from our campsite to the parking lot was about 15 minutes, but probably longer with my recent trauma, but it was still silent behind us. So, it seemed that Sam had been left behind. When we were close enough to the new couple's camp, which was right behind the parking lot, we started screaming for help. The girl, being reasonably frightened, stays in the tent, but the guy comes out to the path to find out what was wrong. We explain the whole attack / almost died situation, and he pulls out a gun with the intention of walking back to our campsite. Luckily, his girlfriend comes out at this point and convinces him that instead of a murder charge, it would be better instead to get us to cell service so that we can dial 911. We're walking towards their car when we realize there's a camp manager a couple of 100 yards away. Perfect. We head towards that. Knock on the door, cry hysterically, and explain what was going on. A very nice lady gets us bottles of water while her husband calls the police. They sit us down on their couch to wait, and for some reason, I still remember seeing that there were 5 deadbolts on the door. He wasn't getting through that door. About half an hour later, about a dozen cops and an ambulance are there. The cops take our story and head up to find Sam, asking us if he's armed. We say that we didn't know. They explain the missing hatchet and my knife in the purse. So they go out armed. Rita and I are loaded into the ambulance, and an officer comes to the door before it closes and state that they found Sam. He was still at the campsite, completely naked, bleeding from the minor wounds Rita had inflicted, holding the hatchet and laughing. The officer said he was mumbling about being possessed by the devil and spouting utter nonsense. The officer asked if he had done any drugs, and we'd said that he'd smoked weed and drank. Could the weed have been laced? I doubt it. My artist friend didn't become possessed by Satan that night. The rest is fairly dull. My first ever ambulance ride, a very pricey emergency visit, a lot of drugs, CT scans to check for internal swelling in my neck, and they wanted to keep me overnight, but there was no way I was going to let that happen. My cat is my therapy animal, and he was home. I was going home. End of story. To add insult to injury, when I got home, I realized that because I'd been having roommate troubles, I'd locked my bedroom door with my cat inside, and my keys were still at the campsite. I could hear him meowing through the door while I just sobbed my eyes out, locked on the outside. I was too loaded up on drugs to go anywhere, so Rita, in a final spur of awesomeness, went with her mother, who worked with abused women and helped me through many a panic attack after, went out and retrieved all my stuff. All of us are at 24 hours of no sleep. That's the story. The rest is just obvious stuff. Charges, prosecution, court, and a lot of physical and mental anguish. He pleaded guilty. The judge asked him if he wanted to make a statement. He didn't. I never got an apology for almost ending my life. Sometimes there's no definite closure. I never believed in bad luck, superstition, possession, or any of that stuff. But I am 100% positive burning that stupid statue is what caused him to snap that night. He wasn't a dangerous person. He never had been violent before. The statue did something. It brought my artist friend bad luck, and clearly had some bad spirit in it that we let go. That's the most detailed account that I've ever given about this incident. I'm 19 now, but I was 16 at the time. Now I've always been superstitious, but I never talked about the stuff, because it scares the crap out of me. And I think that anything involving the dead or spirits should be left alone and not discussed. But anyway, I had a friend of mine who had a dog, and her and her mother were not going to be home that night. So they asked me if I would be kind enough to dog/house sit. Now I had spent countless nights there and had never got a bad feeling about the place. There was only one time it was suspect or so, and it was because another one of my friends was doing the same thing as I was some time before, and called me to come stay the night with her, because she was getting a really creepy vibe from the house. But it was a full moon night, so I assumed it was just the effects of that. So anyway, I went over to the house, saw my friend and her mum, and hung out for a while. They left eventually, and it was just me and the dog on the couch watching TV. I did this until it was dark, and at around 8 o'clock at night, I started getting this feeling, like there was something watching me. The house itself is set up so that the master bedroom is a loft, so that it looks out over the main living room, and I found myself continually looking up there. I just ignored it, and eventually got lost in watching the TV again. But God, do I wish I didn't. Around 11 or 12, I decided it was time to hit the hay, and considering I was the only one there, I wanted to sleep in the awesomely comfy master bedroom in the loft. So I went up there and laid down and went to sleep. This is the time that it starts to get scary. As I'm laying there, I start to hear these sounds, like a man talking. Not really anything I could make out, but I've known my head to do these things when I'm trying to go to sleep. so I just ignored it and eventually fell asleep. I woke up around an hour or two later to the same noises, and just when I was trying to get to sleep this time, they were louder and definitely more prominent. I was scared, but I was also tired, so I tucked my head under the blankets and went to sleep. Now this part I'm going to tell you is why I wear a cross around my neck and will no longer spend a night in my friend's house. I was in the bed on my back when I woke up for the third time, but when I woke up, there was this feeling in me that I could never describe the feeling to you guys, but the closest I can get would be pure evil. I woke up, and all the most horrible feelings you can have as a human were around me, like I was just weirded out, and my brain kind of got really alert really fast, but it was like a presence was around me. The next thing I noticed was a pressure on my chest, like someone was sitting on me when I looked up, and I saw no figure, but I could sense where its body was. Then I tried to move my hands and legs, but I couldn't. They were being pinned down by whatever it was that was there with me. I started freaking out and thrashing with all my strength, and it was at that point that I closed my eyes and was able to see it. It was as if he painted his image to the inside of my eyelids, and when they closed, all I could see was a dark, shadowy figure right on top of me. And I felt all these feelings of evil and terror, and I can't even explain it, just get worse. And then that's when it made this noise. This noise was the most guttural, horrible, fear-instilling noise that I've ever heard in my entire life. It was a growl that still to this day, when I think about it, makes me scared, and will always. It is still the one thing from what happened that I've never been able to accurately describe to another person. This all happened in a short second, while my eyes were closed, and when they opened, I went into some type of super strength survival mode. I pushed harder against whatever it was than I ever have in my entire life. Even with that, I wasn't able to overpower it, but this strength did allow me to slide my legs over the edge of the bed. Once most of my legs were off, I felt only the force of it pushing down on my wrists, which I was able to slide my torso off the bed, and when that happened, the pressure of my wrists went away. I got down the stairs as fast as I could and grabbed all of my things and put them in the car and left. I drove down into town and stared at the creek and packed a lip. It was 5 a.m. when all of this happened. I called my friend's mum and told her I had to leave because something happened. I didn't tell her what until I met her at the house when they got back a little bit later that morning. I talked to her about it a couple of days later, and I hadn't noticed, but she said I had all the symptoms of shock when she saw me. But either way, that's why I don't talk about this stuff often, and I'm only telling you because I think it should be heard. From 2012 to 13, I did a lot of hiking in and around the coastal range in Oregon. I frequently would go out by myself for days and come into town to restock on food if necessary. It was commonplace for me when I was in town to spend the whole day hiking back the 4 hours to where I was camping at dusk. The trail I took wasn't well travelled and looked more like a deer path than anything. I had chosen my campsite for its lack of foot traffic and its serenity, avoiding conventional locations. I had only a cell phone on me during this period of hiking and camping, and no bright clothing. No GPS tracking device and/or emergency beacon. Probably wasn't the smartest idea looking back. There were times that I heard and saw things while out in the forest that I didn't recognize by sight and/or sound, but nothing came close to the incident I had in May of 2013. I had done my usual restock in a small town some 6 miles from where I had decided to camp for the night, and I spent the day in town as usual. I started walking back to my camp location about dusk. Half of the walk I chose to use dirt roads until veering off on the deer trail I used earlier in the day. By this time, it was completely dark, but it was clear out and possible to see the trail still using the moonlight. I don't listen to headphones while hiking. I've always thought it's wiser to be able to hear whatever is around you in case there is a predator, whether human, animal, or whatever. I was mentally doing some calculations for the next day's hike when my mind is literally stopped mid-track. I hadn't heard anything, and I don't make hardly any sound when hiking. If I had heard something, I would have known. For some reason, be it a sixth sense or survival instinct, I'm not sure, I was jolted quite suddenly, out of thought, and very aware of the fact that I wasn't alone on this trail. What was odd to me especially is even though I had heard nothing whatsoever, I knew acutely that something was behind me, specifically about 30 yards down the trail. I still to this day have so many unanswered questions about how I knew this. Standing really still, I turned around and looked down the trail. I didn't see anything, but I felt it. It honestly really is difficult to pin down how to describe what I felt, because I hadn't felt that way before or since. It was straight up fight or flight, and my logical mind was saying there's nothing out of the ordinary, while my senses were saying to get the hell out of there. Again, looking back and remembering this, I have no idea what to say. This is really hard to explain. It was like I was being taunted, and I felt it. The presence of something, or someone, was down the trail, and for some reason, I knew that it knew that I knew it was there, even though I couldn't see it. That's what still scares me to this day. It knew, and it was bright enough for me to see down the trail 30 yards back, no problem. There wasn't anything on the trail, and I will swear by it. It was like I was being taunted, or beckoned to come closer. This was maybe 30 seconds into looking down the trail, if that. I was panicking, but I still wasn't sure what to think, because I still wasn't seeing anything threatening. So I turned around and started walking at a quick pace. I didn't know what else to do. I knew that if in fact a guy was out to kill me, he was probably going to end up killing me, on this trail or in my tent after following me back to it. So why run was my logical thought. I would say that I wasn't even a minute into the trek back that I heard what can only be described as a sound like rushing or swooping air, followed by what seemed like a rake sliding across the dirt trail, the former sound happening right after the latter. These sounds happened together, like half a second apart, 4 times, and they were very close, maybe 20 yards back. Looking back now, I don't know how I was able to stay composed and not soil myself, but somehow I mentally stayed focused on getting back to my tent, ignored the panic, and just kept walking quickly, not looking back. Whoever or whatever it was still followed me the majority for the next hour. I just kept heading onwards and didn't look back. A few minutes from my camp location, the fight or flight feeling gradually but succinctly left, and I crawled into my tent and didn't sleep a minute the entire night. Morning came. I picked up my stuff and left. It's taken a long time to put the metaphorical pen to paper. Everything that I'm about to recount to you is true and happened to me and some very close friends. I think it's best to start at the beginning. During my freshman year of college, I'm not ashamed to say that while prepping for it, I was incredibly lazy. I mean, super lazy. I knew that I had to sort out my digs, somewhere to stay, but was one of those people that just said to myself, it'll sort itself out. Of course, it didn't. I tried my best to sort stuff out a few days before I left, and at the last minute, managed to find someone to split with. It was a reasonable sized apartment, and we had a pretty good time for the first few weeks, and generally no issues. The only reason I say this is because the person I was bunking with had a good friend, and we all became very close friends in a very short space of time. The lady's name in question is Terry. She was the sweetest little thing, and she lived not too far from us, about a 15-minute walk up the road. It was a quiet little spot, her place, but she always seemed tired when we'd go in for classes. I'd ask her if everything was alright, and she'd say that she just didn't sleep well. As I became more invested in our friendship, I started pushing her to tell me more about why she couldn't sleep, and one day, she told me. She said that she has weird dreams while sleeping there, that sometimes she'd wake up in the middle of the night, and it would be like she was pinned to the bed and wouldn't be able to move. At the time, both of us had never even heard of sleep paralysis, so we couldn't exactly coin the phrase. She did mention that when she went home for Thanksgiving, it seemed to go away, or when she slept over at her boyfriend's house, but only when she was sleeping in her bed, in her room, did she feel that way. This put a light bulb in my head and gave me an idea. Now, my major is physics, so I love all things experiments and testing out theories and the like. I had a theory that if I perhaps slept in her bed, the same thing would happen to me. Although I'm going to be honest, I really didn't believe it. I didn't think it'd be anything supernatural, to say the least. I just assumed that the bed must be super uncomfortable, positioned in a bad way, or something like that. Truth be told, I'd never even lied in it, so this would be a fun experiment. I told her that with her permission, we could do a bed swap. She'd come and sleep over at my place, and I'd go sleep over at hers, and we'd see how we both felt. We both had classes next morning at roughly the same time, and agreed to meet at lunch to talk about how we felt. The deal was done. We exchanged our keys, and we went on our way. I arrived to her apartment, and had a nice little time watching TV before I got ready for bed. I looked from the doorframe down to the ominous-looking bed. The bright pink sheets really didn't give it an impression of impending doom, and without much thought, I tucked myself in. I closed the curtains, tucked myself in, and passed out. At about 4 a.m, note, the only reason I know this is because her alarm clock is fully visible from the place you sleep at. So, I woke up, and I had the strangest sensation come over me. I can barely put it into words, but I couldn't move. It was like my whole body was paralyzed. I could move my eyes. I didn't even think my mouth worked. I just lie there, in the dark, staring at the ceiling, assessing what the hell was going on. That's when my eyes slowly moved down to the doorframe, the door that I had left wide open. And there, in the hallway past the bedroom, was a shadow. There was a streetlight, right outside the window of her living room, a window which I hadn't shut the curtains to. I was staring at this, a strange shape looming ominously in the back. I wanted to blink. I wanted to know if this was a figment of my imagination, but I didn't dare look away. I was completely terrified. The fear was getting to me, and I was starting to understand why she'd come to school tired. I assumed it was just a dream, a waking dream. I didn't know what to call it, but I was sure that this must be in my head. Surely this can't be real. That's when the thing moved. I don't really know how to describe its movement. It was like smoke moving through a room, only the smoke is a whole shape that travels completely without leaving any smoke behind. It moved and pulsated, almost like a living, breathing smoke creature. It approached the doorframe. It was very noticeable, as the absence of light moved from place to place, gliding silently across the room. I remember listening intently. It made no sound. All I could hear was the background hum of the occasional car, and her fridge freezer, gently humming, but definitely there. This thing approached even closer, and it got to the foot of the bed, and kept on going through the bed. That's when it became on top of me. I could feel its appendages reach down and push into my arms and legs. This was real. I was being pinned down by whatever the hell this was, and I was feeling like I was being choked. I was finding it hard to breathe. I was finding it hard to keep my eyes open, hearing the gentle tick of the clock in the background all the while. It didn't make sense. The sounds made it like nothing was happening, but the images I was seeing and the feelings I was feeling weren't sinking in my head. I couldn't move, I couldn't do anything, and I became overwhelmed and passed out again. I didn't sleep well, and fortunately woke up with my life the next morning. I overslept. The sound of her alarm was still going on, and I smashed that button and got up hastily. I was already 40 minutes late for class, and my lecturer, I'm sure, was not going to let me in for arriving this late. At this rate, I probably wouldn't even make it to the end of the class. So I cut my losses and just made it to the next one. When I met up with her for lunch, Terry told me that she had a wonderful night's sleep. But just by looking at my face and my clear lack of makeup, it was pretty evident that I had not. She asked what happened, and I looked at her and tried to tell her with my eyes that I didn't want to say. I don't know how to describe it. Was I ashamed of what happened? Was I terrified that I was going insane? Or did I just not believe it? I said, I don't want to talk about it here, and told her to meet me at my apartment in the evening to talk about it. But we spent the remainder of our lunch break having pleasant conversation until it was time to leave. That evening she swung by. She tried telling me that she wanted to sleep over again, just because she hated that house so much. And when she asked what happened last night, I said that I would only tell if she told me first the 100% truth, so that I felt like I wasn't going insane. She agreed, and I unloaded everything that happened that night. I'm surprised her face wasn't shocked that I was either going mad or that something happened. It was just sympathetic. When it came to her turn, she explained everything that happened. Lots of similar circumstances. The black smoke waking her up in the middle of the night, making her feel dizzy, making her fall back to sleep, making her sleep in fear. Always there, always present, and always making her feel on edge. She said that it didn't happen every night, but even when it didn't, she'd always go to bed with a feeling of impending doom, and she'd toss and turn all night, waiting for it to happen, hardly being able to sleep. I knew we had to do something about it. No way I was going to let her stay in that haunted apartment. So we came up with an idea. Even though she had a single bed, we both decided to sleep in her bed the next night, just to see if we'd both experience it. Science and stuff. So that's what we did. We both went over the next night and passed out in her bed. I admit, I found it hard to go to sleep, knowing what could happen. But eventually I managed, of course, and into the land of Nod I fell. Again, at some point during the night, I woke up. I couldn't move. But something was different this time. I could see the light to the bathroom. Now fortunately, this was just adjacent to her room, so the light shining through the open door was very visible and illuminating for the rest of the apartment. Even though I couldn't move, I felt reassured and calm. But just when I heard her wash her hands, did I see the smoke creature once more. There it was, in the living room, in the darkness. She turned off the light, closed the door, and came closer. I don't even think she noticed that my eyes were wide open. This smoke creature was there, and as she tucked herself in and closed her eyes, the thing got ever closer. I was absolutely soiling myself in fear. The thing was at the door frame. The thing had passed the dresser, and now it was approaching the bed. I wasn't sure which of us it was going to go for, but that's when it approached me. It must have sensed my fear, or it must have done this to me, to put me in this state. I felt the pressure exert on my arms and legs once more, with Terry next to me, completely unaware of the horrors I was going through. I felt so confused and so hopeless, as the pain from its pressure grew on my arms and legs. I found it hard to breathe. I felt like I was being choked, this time worse than the first, and the saving grace was that the noises I made actually stirred Terry. She turned around lazily and asked if I was okay, and that is when she opened her eyes. She wasn't asleep. She wasn't suffering from sleep paralysis, and she saw this creature in all its smoky glory. I don't think she knew what to do. No words escaped her mouth. But no sooner had she seen the creature, and the creature realized that she had seen it, that it suddenly evaporated, like mist, and was gone like that. My breathing had returned to normal, and she shook me a few times on the shoulder, and after I blinked, I realized that I was able to move, and that I was not asleep. We both looked at each other, and without saying words, we ran to the door. I grabbed my keys from the bowl, and we walked back to my apartment. She stayed with me until the end of her lease, and we used it as a sort of storage space, but never went back in the evening. She and I have remained close friends throughout the years, and only years later did I ever come across the term sleep paralysis. I'm not 100% sure if this qualifies. I'm not even sure what that thing was. We never went back to try and find out. All I know is that the people that suffer sleep paralysis are probably telling the truth. But I don't know if they're suffering from some kind of similar situation as what we had. Is it just in their heads? Or could it be something more? Something tangible and supernatural, invading their thoughts, their dreams, their mind. and slowly driving them insane. Some questions we still don't have the answers to. I've heard stories of black-eyed kids over recent years. Some of them are just downright creepy. I'm a sensitive. I do my best to be aware and focused. So when/if I'm in danger, or loved ones are in danger, my intuition goes on red alert. With that being said, I'd like to share something interesting. During the most recent New Year's Eve, my son, myself, and my fiancée had a quiet night at home. We watched movies, made dinner, and my son went to bed fairly early, since he was only 5. No wild party. We were marathoning watching Netflix while laughing and chatting in the master bedroom, well after midnight. At which point there was a confident, yet creepy, solid knock at our front door. We live in the country. It's a bit more remote, and all of our neighbours were friendly enough. But they wouldn't have knocked that late, as it would be perceived as rude. Our Jeep was parked in the garage, so it wouldn't be related to a car having the lights on or anything. I'm listening to this because that happened once. The keys to the Jeep in the house were securely hung in place. The fun time we were having quickly shifted to an odd feeling of confusion, coupled with unusual terror. It was really odd. We aren't fearful people. We simultaneously checked our smartphones for anyone stopping by unannounced. Nothing. Except a few well wishes from friends due to it being New Year's Eve and all. I got up to stretch, and my fiancé made sure I wasn't about to answer the door. Hell no, I said. We laughed uncomfortably. I joked with him saying, "'Cause you're gonna do it." I teased him. He scowled and smiled, knowing full well he would have to normally. Why were we so on edge? We both remarked how odd we felt about the knocking and the late hour. In fact, we didn't budge from the master bedroom. Neither of us felt good about checking the door, and figured whomever it was had the wrong house. Then another knock. We were getting agitated, and that strange feeling of terror was back, strong as ever. I've never felt that way about someone knocking on the door before, nor have I not felt safe to answer. It was really odd. I'll paint a more clear picture. Good neighborhood. Our front porch light bulb needed to be replaced, so it was dark as hell out there. I thought it was really weird that someone would be standing out there in the complete pitch black darkness for 3 minutes knocking like that. I mentioned this to my fiancé. The peephole would give us away if we stole a look, since lights were on throughout the house. We didn't dare check. Why? That senseless feeling of fear was disabling. It made it so two grown, very capable at defending themselves adults were essentially cowering in fear after 2 knocks at the front door late at night. What gives? It took about a half hour, but I eventually felt a lot better, no longer afraid, and felt that whoever it was had left. I checked the front of the house through the kitchen window. No cars, no neighbors, no parties. Just the calm sound of crickets. I proceeded to open the front door, after listening to make absolutely certain that no one would surprise me, like a drunk ex-boyfriend passed out on the porch, or something equally hilarious. Satisfied, I opened the front door. It was quiet. In fact, it was too quiet. No sound at all. That's odd. I had a feeling instantly of being watched. From where? Who? What? I got the chills and shut the door, then armed the alarm system. I thought to myself that if they came back, Wiccan called to report suspicious activity to the police. However, it then occurred to me that we wouldn't get through. It was New Year's Eve after all. Awesome, right? Even to me, it sounds like I'm overly paranoid and getting spooked for no reason. I would think the same had it not happened to me. When the second knock took place for a split second, I thought, oh crap, what if? Regarding the black-eyed kids stories I'd read. Mainly it was the remarkable senseless fear we felt that tipped me off. My son slept through it. No, I didn't share this epiphany with my fiancé at that moment. We were too terrified to make any noise. He's legitimately a skeptic. He doesn't know anything about the BEK, and I wasn't about to go into it at the time. He shared there was no way in hell he was answering the door, and I thought his reaction was odd, especially since he didn't know any of the stories. During this ordeal, the doorbell wasn't used at all. What's strange is that the only light in the porch area would have been the illuminated button of the front doorbell. Why wasn't the doorbell pushed? There's no porch light out there. It had burnt out. It was at a height which needed a ladder to be reached. During the busy holidays, we hadn't gotten around to replace the bulb yet. It was on our to-do list of things. It was moved to the top of the list after this experience. It was super late at night, and I've lived here for 8 years. As an example, the only time our door was ever knocked on super late at night was a friendly neighbour letting us know, and this was months ago, that I had left my truck door open when we had unloaded groceries. He announced himself as he was knocking, saying who he was and why, before we even reached the door. We were grateful for his concern, and that this was the only time it happened. It's a good neighbourhood after all. What's interesting is that with my previous knowledge of the black-eyed kids, that occurred to me during this experience, so I stayed put. There was no way I was going to check out who was there, just to be certain. It's more important to express that the immense fear I felt was paralyzing. I truly feel for anyone who has the displeasure of experiencing a black-eyed kid. If that isn't what was on the porch, then it was something equally as terrible. It's also important to share this tidbit. I'm not a person who's normally fearful of much. Honestly, there is danger in just about everything. However, that doesn't stop me from my daily adventures, and I'd rather enjoy life than live in fear. I'm a streetwise female who is always aware of her surroundings, as well as a survivor of a home invasion as well. Interestingly enough, when someone tried to rob me years prior, they were discovered in my kitchen when I was getting a quick glass of water before bed. We hadn't even been home for 2 minutes. I kept a Brita in the fridge to keep cold filtered water. When I opened the fridge, the light illuminated the kitchen well enough so that I could see the man standing on the kitchen corner. As unnerving as that was, I wasn't afraid. Fight kicked in versus flight. All I did was look straight at the man and say, "Get out." I walked towards him with purpose, and he fled. I wasn't harmed. He ran from the house. My then boyfriend, back then it was someone I dated a few years ago, was amazed at my bravery. I've been trained in self-defense, have taken martial arts for years, so there you have it. Sometimes people fall on hard times and take desperate measures to rob others, and that basically was someone looking to rob a house that they thought was empty. I surprised them, and they fled. With this experience that I've described, my instincts were going nuts. It was so terrifying that I wanted to share this with the community, as a helpful way to warn others. If you have someone or something knocking late at night, and it's followed by a similar feeling of overwhelming dread, simply trust yourself. Do not go near the door. Nor could I. no matter what. That dreadful feeling was so pronounced, our instincts are there to keep us safe. So trust that feeling. It's there to keep you safe. Don't second guess yourself. We have since installed a security camera and restored the porch light. Very early on a cool, dark, moonless morning in November, I eat breakfast quickly with the friends I'm camping with and hop into my car to head to my hunting spot. We're bow hunting in southern Ohio, an annual tradition, camped on a high bluff in sight of the Ohio River. On chilled fall nights, with a blanket of stars above us and a fire pushing a cloud of smoke to the sky, we can see the lights from barges moving slowly up and down the river. At this place, for 4 days, we are in a different world, hundreds of miles from the bustling and familiar cities we've come from. Not that these thousands of acres of woods aren't becoming more familiar over the years, but what brings us back is the unknown. I drive out of the camp alone, down a paved road for several miles, then turn north, away from the river, up a dirt road meandering through one of the thousands of hollows rippled across this landscape. I'm exiting cellular service, rolling along a winding road following a creek bottom, a deep valley with a large hill ascending on both sides. But I can see nothing but the grey glow of the gravel and the trees and shadows dancing in my headlights. I pull off the road as far as I dare and park an empty gear from the car. All is quiet as possible. Everything from this point is prepared and navigated with the light of my headlamp, set to the dimmest setting. I close the car door with a gentle nudge, avoiding any sound that would intrude too deeply into the forest. Before the hike, I pause, breathe in the cool fall air, and assess my surroundings. Totally black, and with very little wind. Dead quiet. I'll have to be exceptionally silent on my way to avoid detection. I stalk down a hill and cross the shallow creek, each step slow and deliberate, feet searching first for any stick that might snap under my weight. Carefully, I wind through a narrow trail that I've partially trimmed through the impassable thicket of briars and brush that runs along the creek. At the base of a tree, I prepare a stand, used to ascend the tree for the hunt. Inching my way up the tree, I see nothing but the blackness, watching only the texture of the bark pass directly in front of my face. Once in position, at about 20 feet, all activity stops, and I disappear back into the silence of the woods. Every few minutes a sip of coffee, just as the sky begins to provide enough light for me to see my surroundings. Shooting light it's called. Well, before the morning sun will appear. I hear a crackling and rustling ahead from down the hill, at maybe 150 yards. Is it a deer? If so, it's running. But why? During the November rut, white-tailed bucks are known to chase does for long distances through the woods, desperate for a breeding opportunity. I've seen this dozens of times. Something about this is different though, and the closer it comes, the less familiar it seems. Only several seconds pass, and the animal is in sight. Or maybe it's more appropriate to say that the exact location of the sound is now apparent, because I can't determine what I am seeing, or if I am seeing anything at all. I can hunt for weeks without the satisfaction of a deer passing by my stand, but oddly enough, this thing is heading right to my location, at a speed that's making me uncomfortable. The creek bottom begins its topography up the hill, with a very steep, if not vertical, wall of rocks. There is very little vegetation here, a few leaves collected in the fissures. I finally perceive the creature crest this drop-off, and this is at my eye level. I'm 20 feet up a tree. But before I can make it, it's already descended the feature at full speed, and it's heading right to me. Now it's just light enough that I can describe any leaf on the forest floor, but I can only describe the source of the noise as a bodiless, translucent whirl of brown and grey and black, as though I can see right through it, moving in a perfectly straight line, too straight, along the forest floor at extremely high speed. The coffee and the hike have ensured that I have my wits about me, and I'm suddenly struck with the thought that whatever this thing is, it may climb this tree. Anything that can slice through the forest as though trees and rocks and everything else doesn't exist can surely climb a tree, or perhaps jump the full distance. My chest is slammed with adrenaline in the split second that I watch it cruising from the bottom of the hill towards me. My pulse booms in my ears. The intensity of terror peaks as it arrives. There has been no time. I am not prepared. They say a mountain lion will watch you. You'll never know it's there. And if it decides to kill you, it will be in a split second. We delude ourselves to believe that the unexpected may be manageable to some degree, that we could make the decision to prevent disaster. This is often false. There are forces in creation that are not only overpowering and unpredictable, they are nearly instantaneous. Staring helplessly, I watch this devil pass under, almost touching the tree. Thank God for this tree. Never does it reveal itself. Always a blur, a violent storm of leaves, a ghost, never an animal. Only a presence. It rushes past and pierces through the thickest brush imaginable. Down through the creek, never slowing, never acknowledging the 7-inch bank of the creek, never changing course, at absolutely supernatural speed. Same as it came, but in the opposite direction. I listened to the sticks and vegetation mark its terrible progress until the sound became distant, and then it was no more. Terrain that would take a man 15 minutes to traverse, if at all, was covered in seconds. A heavy chill runs through my body, and although the sense of dread abates a little, I'm overcome with a heavy eeriness, a feeling of having encountered something unexplainable, supernatural. No, of course not. It was a coyote or a bobcat or a fox. Yes, that's probably what it was. My mind is desperate to make sense of it. I turn to the rock wall along the hill. Can the animal I know descend a wall like that? Maybe. But would they? And if they did, wouldn't I be able to see them? Yes. Does any animal run that fast? I don't think so. This is unusual. I sit in the tree motionless, sedate and tingling, trying to reconcile. I look up the creek to a thick, brushy meadow along the shaded bottoms to the north. A fog hovers over all in silence, the woods filled with a hypnotic and isolated beauty. I gaze for some time, and slowly the sun crests the hill to the east, causing a few beams to the top of the fog, and the golden leaves remain on the trees. Gradually the shadows retreat, and daylight moves into the forest. I saw no other creatures that day. Today was a day like any other day. I woke up at noon, got showered and dressed, cleaned out my room. My mom was out shopping, and my dad was up on some land we own trying to clear out the brush. My younger sister was at school. Today, she had a choir concert, so I was searching for something nice to wear. The day felt unusually long. It's almost like I was anticipating something. I felt nervous, but peaceful. My mum came home, so we went for a walk with our dog and talked as usual. She told me shopping was lonely without me. I had a bad day yesterday, so she wanted to let me sleep. I put my arm around my mum and hugged her with a smile. We talked about my fears of college, which I'll be starting in August. We talked about things we're looking forward to during the holidays. We talked about things that make us sad, things that cheer us up, songs we like, old musicians, and how much Steven Tyler looks like Mick Jagger, and had a laugh about that. I couldn't seem to shake my feelings of anxiety. A few hours had passed, and my sister had come home. We were in her bedroom so that I could help her figure out what to wear. I finally found a pretty white top and a pair of silky dress pants. She got dressed and left for her concert. I felt stressed, so I decided to stay back to get a shower before I left. I was standing in the shower, warm water hitting my back and the steam relaxing my entire body. I was stepping out when I was suddenly filled with an overwhelming sense of dread and worry. I felt dizzy and disoriented. I tried to shake the feeling, so I blow-dried my hair and put on my dress. I heard knocking at the front door, but I felt sheer terror. I didn't want to go downstairs, and I didn't want to answer the door. My dog started growling and barking and scratching the door. "Hello? I need to use your phone." At this point, I was obligated. I ran down and opened the door. I left the storm door shut and locked it, so I was able to talk through the next scene. It was a girl of about 13 with long blonde hair, wearing a bright blue hoodie and torn jeans. Next to her was another little girl of about 6 or 7. She had short blonde hair and little above the shoulder length and was wearing a pink dress with flowers on it. Both were looking down, so I couldn't see their faces. Hi. Can I help you girls? We need to use your phone. We're not from around here, and we lost our mother. She's worried." The older girl mumbled, still looking down. I felt compelled to let them in, but I wasn't willing to risk anything with that horrible feeling I had. I'd heard so many stories about the black-eyed kids, and researched into it a lot. These stories had made me terribly curious, and intrigued me greatly. I know too much about them to deny what's happening. "You can use my cell phone, but you can't come in." "We've been outside all day, Mom. Please, we're cold." It was a warmer day. It was in the high 50s Fahrenheit, compared to what it had been. "I can't let you in. If you need to call your mom, I can let you use my cell. That's it." So I stepped out onto the porch, not knowing what to expect. I noticed the older girl get more tense, like she was starting to get angry. "Please, Mom. We are very tired and have to call our mum." Her tone had gotten more aggressive. It was unsettling. "Look at me." "What?" "No. We need to use your phone." I said, "Look at me. If I can't see you in the eyes, I won't let you in." They both looked up at me. They had large, dead black eyes. I felt as if my soul was being drawn into them. My heart sank. These were the things I'd read about. The soulless, violent children were standing in front of me. I felt so compelled to say yes. I almost felt guilty for being so aggressive in my response, but I knew what they were. I can't let my compassion overtake my common sense. "What are you?" I know those eyes. "What are you, children? What do you want?" She said nothing. She tilted her head and stared directly at me in the eyes. It felt almost hypnotic. It's a feeling I can't really explain. They looked at each other and smiled. "Ma'am, we're two girls who need to call their worried mother. Please, this is the last time I'll ask nicely." She kept that twisted smile on her face and just glared at me. I backed into the door, opened it, and slammed it in their face. I locked the door and walked through the house in a panic, making sure all the windows and doors were locked. I heard knocking on the window. I backed myself against a wall and peered over just enough where they couldn't see me, but I could see them. I crawled onto the floor to another room. They then came to that side of my house and began knocking on the windows of the room I was in. It's like they could see me, no matter how much I tried to hide. In a panic, I called the police. "This is Carlisle's daughter. I need someone. There are some girls knocking on my windows and they won't go." I told them I can't let them in. "Please come. I'm scared." My dad is good friends with a lot of the cops, so they know who I am by my father's name. My dog was still barking furiously. I'd honestly forgotten he was even there. His barking shook me back to reality. The cops soon arrived and told the girls to leave. They actually walked away. I wasn't sure what to make of that. I've never heard of them just walking away. Maybe they have their own fears, cops being one of them. The cops looked shocked when they first started talking to the girls, but eventually got them to leave. I realized I was really late to my sister's concert, and in a panic, grabbed my shoes and everything and drove over to the school. On a positive note, the concert was great. The chorale sounded beautiful, and I was terrified to go home after. With reason, of course. I truly cannot make heads or tails of my experience. Let me tell you though, if you ever run into these children, you'll regret answering the door. Whatever you do, don't look into their eyes. It's like they have some sort of hypnotizing power. You'll feel dizzy and sick. You'll never forget your run-in with these inhuman children. I've been sleeping in my room lately because I need a new bed desperately, and all of this occurred on my couch. My living room is a small square, maybe 12 feet by 12 feet. I have a really comfy black leather sectional couch, and a TV stand, and a flat screen TV, and a coat rack, all in my living room. I sleep on the end of the couch, where I can see the TV, and straight through the house to the kitchen while lying on my left side. At the time, my 14-year-old son would sleep on the other end of the couch, so I wasn't alone or afraid, and I'm not easily scared. The first night I woke up, eyes wide open, but I could not move my body. The only thing I could move were my eyes, and I could hear and see all around me. When I woke up, standing right in front of me was an almost completely black figure that stood maybe 4 feet tall. Imagine the Muppet Beaker, but all black with white eyes and black pupils. This is why I question if it was just a dream. So as soon as I'm aware of it, Shadow Beaker knows I am awake and looks at me as it contorts its neck so that its body is still upright, but its head is now completely upside down. Surprisingly, I looked Shadow Beaker in the eyes and conveyed to it, non-verbally, that I would kill it, and it just vanished, and I was able to move freely. I think that I pissed something off, because the next night, I was lying in the same position on the couch, the same as the night before, when I became aware of my surroundings. I also found that I couldn't move. My 14-year-old son, or what I thought was my son, was standing at the threshold between the living room and the dining room. He didn't look right, so I moved my eyes to the right to see if my son was still on the couch sleeping, and he was. So I moved my eyes back to where this lookalike was standing, and as I caught sight of it again, it crouched down in the way a primate would when they are about to take off running. It moved towards me, still crouched down, and when it gets to the couch, it jumps over me and leaves my line of sight. I moved my eyes in the direction it went and could not see it, but I could feel what felt like very hot breath on my ear and side of my face. It was as if someone had their face right up next to my ear and was breathing very heavily. So I thought the words in the name of Jesus and was able to move again. The next light, I was lying on my stomach, but my head was slightly hanging off the couch with my face towards the floor, when I became aware of the room around me. There was a small person in a long white dress and floppy white sun hat rubbing the back of my head in a soothing way. Although they were small, I didn't get the impression this was a child. I was not afraid and didn't feel threatened, but I also didn't trust it. The thing is, I don't remember how I got out of this one, but after a few minutes I could move again. Finally, when I became aware on the last night, I was practically sitting straight up with my back against the armrest and my legs on the couch. I know for a fact that I laid all the way down on the couch to go to sleep. Also, it felt like there was something trying to choke me from behind with one hand, but the strangest thing was that I didn't feel a human hand. I'm still trying to figure this one out, honestly. The best description I can give is that it felt like 3 long fingers, 2 wrapped around the left side of the back of my neck and 1 around the right side. The grip kept getting tighter and tighter until I was feeling like I couldn't breathe. In my head I began to think, I rebuke you in the name of Jesus, and I became able to move. As I regained movement, I screamed out the same thing, and I was released or woke up or whatever, and I haven't had another experience like that since. I think I was dreaming, but those experiences seemed so real. Can anyone help shed some light on this, or point me in the right direction? This story took place when I was 17, Christmas of 2015. For 2 weeks, my dad and I had decided to spend Christmas with our family, as I have always dreamed. He booked our tickets, and 2 months later we were on a plane to London, England. After an 8-hour plane ride, we were safely in London. Despite my anxiety, my uncle was there to drive us to the countryside, which took about 4 hours overall, as we ended up visiting family on the way to the countryside, food stops and toilet breaks. We finally made it to Helston, Cornwall. For the remainder of the 2 weeks, I would be staying alone with my wonderful grandparents, and my dad would be staying with his brother and his brother's now ex-wife. Most of what I remember from the trip was exploring Helston and Truro, eating a lot of Walker's crisps, illegally drinking alcohol in pubs because nobody ever asked for my ID, and going clothes shopping. I remember getting an eerie feeling almost the moment I got there. I had felt that way when I was at my grandparents' house 2 summers before that, and the many other homes I visited, and plenty of those homes are fairly old. I remember falling asleep many times, and I had this unnerving notion that someone was staring at me, or these random brushes of cold air when I would be laying in bed or making food in the kitchen. I never mentioned anything. If I ignored it, it would go away. right? Well, you're dang right. It didn't. I felt safer with my door closed, because it felt like something was standing down that short but dark hallway leading to the living room. I would hear random noises almost every night, but I put it up to the fact that maybe I was just hearing my grandparents talk in their sleep, or because the house was old, that the house was settling or some other stuff. Despite the weird feelings, I was getting almost 24/7. I tried to ignore it, and did so successfully a few times. It all came to head when on New Year's Eve, I returned home at around 2:50 a.m. I was really hungry, as my cousins threw a frozen pizza in the oven, and I wouldn't touch that stuff. I had had a few beers earlier on in the night, and I had 2 after midnight, so me seeing things wasn't out of the realm of possibility. I got this craving for a ham sandwich, put the rest of my beers in my room, dressed in my pajamas, and went to the kitchen. Besides the kitchen was this little sunroom that would lead out back. There was a top level and a bottom level. The top level was open, but my grandparents were keeping the bottom level locked, as it was far too cold, and the heating was practically non-existent in the bottom level. The kitchen was lit up, but the top level of the sunroom was almost completely dark. As I was making my sandwich, I casually looked to the right as I was buttering my bread. In the corner of my eye, I saw what looked like a tall yet hunched over figure. At first, I believed that I was just being paranoid, put my stuff back in the fridge, and when I turned, the figure was still there. Anyone who listens to this, if you've ever played Left 4 Dead, does anyone remember the witch? Well, this strange, shadowy creature looked like a dark, tall version of the witch. I couldn't make out any noticeable facial features, only a bony figure with long and bony fingers. The creature had long, almost stringy hair. It was almost as if the lights were beginning to dim just by the creature being there, and I swear it was somehow moving closer. But I hadn't seen one of its ginormous legs move once. I could feel my heart beating incredibly fast, just as it is now while I remember this, because I can still remember the feeling, and I still fear that I will see that creature again. I turned my fat ass around, sandwich in hand, and ran into my room. I felt a little nauseous, and could barely finish my sandwich. I just wanted to go to bed, so that it could be daylight once again, and that if I was going to be killed, I'd hopefully be asleep if any strange demon decided it wanted me as a snack or something. I was going to be sleeping there for 2 more nights. I just had to get past it and stay strong. I didn't see that creature again during the rest of my stay there. I tried to get out of that house as much as I could, and was successful in doing so. The last creepy thing that happened when I was laying in bed at around 4 a.m. was we had a flight at 12, so I had to be up early for the long drive, and since the weather was abysmal, we wanted to leave early. I remember talking to my friend on Facebook, and I was talking about how scared I was of the flight. She told me I was going to be fine, that I wasn't going to die, and that I would get home safely in no time. When she told me that I wasn't going to die, I was like my body was being taken over, and I said out loud, "But I'm already dead." I told my dad what happened a few days after we got home. He said that maybe I saw the angel of death or something. I have no clue. I was, and still am, extremely freaked out, as it might just be one of the most terrifying experiences I've ever had, with something that was clearly paranormal. The only reason I think it's real is because usually when I'm drunk or tipsy, I don't tend to take much notice of things. But when I saw this thing, it was like I had been snapped back to reality. and I couldn't even feel the alcohol I had been drinking before this moment. I'm sure there must be some sort of explanation. Perhaps I was just still feeling the effects of the alcohol, or maybe I was tired, and all of it just added up to a very creepy hallucination, or maybe something more. I work as a broadcast engineer, and a few years ago, I received a phone call at around 9:30/10 p.m. from the on-duty engineer that our over-the-air signal had gone out, and we were off the air on our over-the-air platform. We figured out that the problem was at our transmitter and needed to be corrected manually. My boss asked for someone to volunteer to go with him, and after a few seconds of awkward silence, I offered. So, our RF transmitter site was located on top of Beacon Mountain in Beacon, New York, which was about an hour plus from our station. At the time, I had never been up there, so going there in the middle of the night was a little spooky. I met my boss and we drove together, and got to the mountain a little before midnight. The road up the mountain to the transmitter site is a long, narrow, windy, and steep dirt road with a lot of big, loose rocks, so the drive up and down is scary enough. I can't emphasize enough how dark this drive was, like pitch black. A few times while going up, we could see headlights coming towards us of people with their off-road jeeps, which wouldn't be as weird if it wasn't in the middle of the night. We also saw 2 different campfires in the woods, which I just assumed were local groups hanging out and drinking. My boss told me that locals hung out near the transmitter site sometimes, and should be avoided, as they had a tendency to be sketchy. Didn't seem too sketchy to me, but what did I know? It was my first time there. My boss also told me that he never travels to the mountain without a gun. He said it's more than the locals. I've seen stuff out there I really can't explain. We get to the top, do our work on our transmitter, close everything up, and start to head back down. As we're heading down, we were at a particularly steep part of the road, when you pretty much have to ride your brake because the car won't stop until the incline levels are out a little. All of a sudden, 3 deer sprint out in front of us, not even looking at our oncoming car, causing us to swerve since we were already riding the brake. The front of the car hit a rock, which stopped our momentum. My boss instantly turned off the car, and once the sound of the engine died, we heard something big run in the opposite direction away from the road, up the natural slope of the hill. I shined my flashlight in that direction, but whatever it was already out of sight. We could still see branches moving and leaves settling from being disturbed by whatever ran away. I asked my boss if he thought that was another deer, or possibly a bear. He replies, "Bears run on all 4s. Whatever that was, ran on 2 legs. And bears don't hunt deer. Something was chasing them." When we first heard the footsteps, I would estimate that they were as close as 10 to 15 feet from the car, when it started to run away, but appeared to be standing over us, as if there was a natural incline up the mountain. There are a lot of logical explanations, like that my boss was trying to scare me, or that it was a local walking/running through the woods, but here are a few things to consider. Yes, it could have been a person walking alone through the woods, but why chase deer? And why run away from the car? Also, whatever ran away was out of sight quickly, within 3 to 4 seconds running uphill. This person would have had to have been in the greatest shape ever to run up the hill that quickly. This also sounded way too big to be a bobcat, mountain lion, or coyote. My boss is not the kind of guy that would try to scare people. He's a very stern all business type of guy. He seemed pretty rattled by this and wanted to get off the mountain ASAP. I ended up going back up that mountain many more times before leaving for a new job, and I never saw or heard anything like that night. However, I never went back after sunset. I no longer work for this company, and this company no longer owns the transmitter site, so I will likely never have a reason to go back. I don't know of any reported sightings or experiences in the area, but I do know that over the years there have been many car accidents on the road. I assume all the accidents are due to the poor conditions of it, but honestly, I have no idea. When my grandma was very sick, my parents decided to move closer to her in order to help treat her and make sure that she was comfortable during her final days. However, her final days seemed to drag on a bit longer than we'd all anticipated, and seeing that she was going to live for longer than we thought, which is a good thing, don't get me wrong, my parents decided to sell their old house and to live in hers. Her house was very large. It was the house that my father had grown up in, and it had been standing strong for at least 150 years. This was in rural England, and me and my parents liked the change of scenery and change of pace. However, there was something that always creeped me out: the basement. I never liked going down there. I never had any reason to. It was a very small, dark room, and didn't really have stairs, as they were rotting and old, and you had to be very careful as you treaded down if there was something that you needed to retrieve. For the most part, it was mostly used to store wine. That's what my grandma used it for anyway. I think it appeared to be more of an afterthought, as it was bricked up, but it was damp, and you could smell the earth around you. I never felt comfortable. However, as we moved in, my parents needed a place to store some old boxes, and so that's where they put them. It was on a typical Sunday that I was bored, and my dad told me to go find one of his power tools, as he was trying to fix one of the door hinges. When asking where it was, he told me that it was in the basement in one of the boxes. I really didn't want to go, and asked if my sister could go in my place. But she being 6 years old, he really didn't trust her with any of these tools. So, down I went into the darkness in search for these tools. I turned on the light, which barely illuminated the small space, and started digging around the boxes for the tools. That's when something caught my eye. Something reflecting off one of the stones. I pushed the light, which was dangling from a wire, a little bit closer, to see if I could check out what this thing was. The sparkle had me excited. Money? Could it be money here? I couldn't see it well enough though. The illumination was too poor. So I quickly found my dad's power tool and told myself that I would be back to try and see what this mystery could hold. Upon returning a few minutes later with a decent torch, the light showed that it was indeed something metal. I tried pulling at it, to no avail. I was starting to pull at it, with no avail. Clearly, whatever it was sealed solidly into the wall. And that was it. I couldn't get to it, and I forgot all about it. Then a few years passed. I had grown up a fair amount. I was now 17, and my grandma at this point had passed away. But we ended up inheriting the house, and after paying off the tax, we were living there very happily. Me, my sister, my mother, and my father. It had taken some time to get used to the new environment, but this was now our home. One year, we had some particularly bad floods, and the basement flooded. Everything there was ruined, and 17-year-old me had the task of getting rid of everything that had been soaked. We managed to get all the water out, and we were considering just sealing it up. As we were debating this, I went down and made sure that I retrieved everything so that it could all be disposed, and to check on the off chance that anything was salvageable. I wasn't sure about the wine. My dad couldn't tell if water had got in or not, so sadly all of that had to be disposed of. But that's when I saw it again. The shiny thing in the wall. I hadn't been back here in a long time. I hated the basement, so I had no reason to. And that's when I wondered if this time I could pull it. So, with everything being so wet, and apparently the cement being weakened, I gave it a tug, and stronger 17-year-old me felt some movement. This caused genuine excitement. I started pulling it, and it became very clear that it was behind the brickwork. I started playing around, and after retrieving a knife from the kitchen, it was very, almost too easy to start taking the bricks apart by chipping away at the old cement. That is when I found it. Hidden behind here was a box, a metal tin. It was sealed, and sealed very well, might I add. When I managed to finally take the lid off, that I discovered what was hidden inside. An old Ouija board, as well as a few coins, notes, a die, and a few other bits and bobs. These must have been games, but why would anyone put games in a tin and bury them behind a wall in the basement? This left me very confused, but I was happy with my loot. Now bear in mind, me and my family were never raised religious, and I in no way believed in anything supernatural. These were just games. I mean, you had some classics there on paper, but the board was made out of solid wood. It was sturdy and looked the real deal. You could tell how old it was. So I invited my friends over a few days later to muck around with it. Fortunately for me, it was one of the days where my dad had to take my sister to a dance competition, and my mother, being the supportive mother she was, went with them, which left me and the house alone. It was your typical Friday evening. I invited the boys round, and we decided to have a go on the Ouija board. We tried to just muck around at first, pretending to be all spooky and creepy. We fetched a glass from the kitchen, put our fingers on it, and started saying, in a creepy and almost mocking tone, "If anyone's there, we invite you, woo!" Like that. Silly, I know. I'm sure we must have offended something. We waited to see if there was any movement, but there was nothing. When we were about to give up, though, did movement start slowly coming through. Each of us, of course, thought that it was one of our friends making the glass move, but alas, we all denied it. One of the friends was writing everything down, and towards the end, we had a friend writing everything down, and whilst playing our Q&A, we established that we were talking to Sam, and Sam was not very happy. He just said no to most of our questions. We really weren't understanding it. We asked him where he died, and he just said no. We asked him if he was dead, and he just said no. And we asked him if he would like to continue talking to us, and only then did he say yes. We tried asking him how old he was, but there'd never be a reply, we were a bit creeped out by now, although I personally believed it was definitely Barry. Barry was always a joker. So the session concluded without much information. We weren't really happy and moved on to a different game. Bear in mind, we never said hello and we never said goodbye. So I'm not really sure how that works. Apparently it means we left the session open, and I think that was our mistake. The rest of that night was uneventful, but when I went to bed that evening, I had this heavy and oppressing feeling that was covering all my body. I tried to go to sleep, but felt really uncomfortable, and resorted to turning the light on in order to sleep all night. It gave me the comfort I needed to wake up happy in the morning, but it was still there. It felt like something was wrong. I tried telling myself I was just creeped out, that I was playing with this silly board and that it was getting to me, and that I should just move on. The feeling didn't go away, but as long as I remember, I tried putting it to the back of my mind. A few weeks later, I told myself that it had to do with the board, and put it up on eBay as an authentic Ouija board, which I thought could fetch a pretty penny, but only managed to get me about £25. Not that bad. I was just glad to be rid of it, to be fair. But the feeling never went away. That's when the apparitions started. I started seeing a shadow, some kind of weird smoke creature, standing at the foot of my bed at night. I'd be unable to move, and it would just be there staring at me. There'd be times when I would come into my room in the middle of the night and look in and turn the light on, and in that split second before the light went on, would I see the creature of shadow in a corner of the room or on the ceiling. But the moment the light switch flicked on, it would be gone. I was scared that I was going insane, that my mind was being consumed by this primal fear of that stupid board, but I tried to be stronger than it. The apparitions didn't cease though. Nay, they started to become more commonplace. I started losing sleep, and when I was dozing off at school, just at the point before I knew that I was going to pass out, did I see it. It was right by my teacher. This black, grey, smoke thing. This figure, just looming around, haunting me. I didn't know what to do. There was a girl in my class who was really into Wicca, and I tried telling her about it. I also thought she was really hot, and wanted to ask her out, and thought this would be the perfect segue into it. Clever 17-year-old me, trying to impress a Wicca girl by telling her that I think I'm being possessed by a demon, or at the very least, stalked by one. I told her about it, and she was intrigued, and told me a few things I should do to keep it at bay. She told me that I should burn sage. I didn't even know what sage was. That was quite hard to come by anyway. But I tried it, and it worked for a little while. But when I got bored, or lazy and stopped doing it, did the thing resurface, and it would be there again. It started to get incessant. I was becoming really paranoid, scared that every time I'd look in a dark space it would be there, sometimes even a light space. I just wanted this thing to be gone. So, I resorted to going down to the local church one day, and banged on the church door until someone came out. It was a priest, and I told him that I wasn't religious, but that I needed help. He listened to me, but basically dismissed me and told me to go home. I didn't know who to turn to. At this point, the girl that I'd been talking to, the Wicca one, had become my girlfriend, and we'd started to get really close to each other. She started seeing the thing as well when she'd stay over. Not that my parents knew she'd stay over, and she began to become frightened for my safety and well-being. She spoke to some of her Wicca friends, and basically got another board. She said that maybe the best thing to do would be to say goodbye and finish the session. She and I joined hands, lit some candles, and requested to speak to Sam. Sam answered, and it was the stereotypical no to every question, but did say that it was him, or at least I hoped. We asked if he would please leave, and he said no. When we asked why he was haunting us, he never gave a reply. I said as loud and forcefully as I could, I'm genuinely not sure where it came from, but I screamed at the top of my lungs, Sam, you are not welcome. You're not welcome here, you're not welcome in my home, and I condemn you by the grace of God to go back from whence you came. And then I dragged the cup up to goodbye and ended the session. Clever me thought that would be the end of it, and for the most part, it was. Quite boring, I know. I'm gonna be honest, I felt like quite a badass, telling a demon to go do one, and that I wanted to live my life freely. Things did crop up here and there. Shadows, things moving by themselves, but I got sleep and never saw the apparition full scale like that again. Maybe I opened a doorway to something. Maybe I could now see things that others couldn't. I don't really know how to describe it. All that I know is that life for the most part almost went back to normality. Me and the girl actually ended up getting married, and this piqued my interest in the occult and the paranormal. I don't know what would have happened to me if I'd have never met her and found a way to try and put this at bay. But I am happy with my life now and how things have turned out. I do have to be grateful though, as this experience made me who I am today. But still, it's not something I would ever dabble in again. It was the summer of 1986, and I had just graduated from high school. I was living in Vancouver, British Columbia, and my girlfriend and I spent the afternoon at Kitsilano Beach, suntanning. She had to leave early for work, so I stayed on the beach, alone. It was around 4, and I was hungry. I walked up to the beach over an area called Spanish Banks. There was a concession out there, and I had a long line. It was an Expo 86, so we had a ton of tourists that summer, and the beach was packed. I placed my order, but was told that it would be a 15 to 20 minute wait for my food. I perched myself on a bench and proceeded to wait. For some reason I looked across the street. The concession stand is adjacent to the road, a narrow 2-lane road, not the best for beach traffic, and the other side of the road is a forest called the UBC Endowment Lands, attached to the university. There was a guy walking down through the forest, which was also a steep hill. There is no sidewalk below, and it was a really dangerous place to try and cross the street. Not only that, it was an odd place to come out of. Imagine a steep hill with lots of bushes and trees going straight down a curb, and then a busy street. The second that I saw this guy, and I was far away at the concession stand, I had that gut-wrenching fear that everyone describes, even though he was far away. I could tell that he was grinning maliciously, fixated on me. He crossed the street grinning, and at that moment there were no cars, so he got across easily. He made a beeline straight to where I was, and went and sat on a bench and crossed from me. I'm not good with distances, but I approximate it must have been 10 to 15 feet. He was First Nations, a bit older than I was, maybe 1920. He had medium-length hair, and was wearing a white t-shirt and a red flannel shirt over it, unbuttoned. He was wearing jeans. I can't remember his shoes, runners of some kind. He was fairly attractive, but utterly evil. Malicious was the word that kept going through my mind. Now his eyes, they were black. No whites could be seen, but they were not shiny like all of the other accounts I've read. His were dull. The way that I described it to my boyfriend later was that they looked like scratched black plastic. They also gave me the feeling of when you look into a microscope or binoculars and you can see your own eyelashes squished against the lens. And it's almost spider-like. His eyes and his everything frightened me like nothing ever else had. He sat there grinning at me. He knew that I was terrified, and I knew that I had to pretend that I was not. I felt totally alone, even though there were tons of people around. No one else seemed to notice anything amiss. I felt as though knowing that this person existed made me hate being alive. The world would never be safe if things like him existed. I sat there acting totally normal on the outside, trying to keep it together, because it seemed instrumental to my survival. I had no idea what this thing would do, but I felt as if my life was in danger. My food was ready for pickup. I got it, and then proceeded to go over to the payphone, and I kept my back to him as I phoned my boyfriend. I told him to get over to Spanish Banks because there was a really scary guy here and I didn't know how to get away. After my boyfriend hung up, I stayed in the phone booth, pretending to talk to someone. At some point, I had to get off. Maybe someone wanted the phone, and I sat back on the bench, and he stayed, grinning. A minute or two before my boyfriend got there, he got up and sauntered away down the beach. When he arrived, he wanted to go after him. I grabbed his arm and told him that we had to get out of there now. I couldn't properly explain it to my boyfriend, just how terrifying that experience was. I still can never explain it properly. It was scarier than any murderer. It felt as if this thing could do something to you. It wouldn't just end your life. It would do something that would destroy or torment your soul forever. I've had a couple of other experiences that are slightly related to this, though different.